Great, Mr. Morning again. We're going to keep tricking it. Shall we start it?
Yeah, we should start.
This is SusTalks number 22, and today we have Manish Dabkara, who is the founder, MD of EnKing International, and he's going to be taking us through the evolution of carbon markets. Mr. Dabkara has built quite a formidable reputation over the last 12, 13 years now in the carbon markets, building out EnKing from a sole proprietorship to a now publicly listed company. Without further ado, I'm going to hand over to you to take us through for the next 25 minutes, your version of the carbon markets, and then we'll follow it up with a Q&A with me and then with the audience. But just right before we dive into it, I do have a quick poll to launch to get a sense of who's with us today and what the level of knowledge about carbon markets in the audience is. So just going to launch a quick poll. Yes. Right. It should be on your screen anytime now. So 5 questions. What is your work identity? What's your current knowledge of carbon markets? What's your first thought that you associate with voluntary carbon markets today? And how much carbon dioxide equivalent is emitted every year globally? Okay, about 10 more seconds to get some answers. Great, a lot of sustainability entrepreneurs and founders. I'm just going to share the result. All right, another 5 seconds. Great. So we have half our audience so far is sustainability entrepreneurs, some folks in climate policy. What's the knowledge of carbon markets so far? Not much, but would like to get involved. That's the dominant answer. What's the first thought our audience associates with voluntary carbon markets? It's a powerful lever for climate action, and it can use for scaling sustainability solutions. And most people actually got the carbon dioxide equivalent number right, which is about 43 billion tons a year, our global emissions.
Anirudh, are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
We could see your screen also, but lost it.
Okay, should I start? Because I was not able to hear your voice, so I thought there is some misconnection in between. So let me share my screen again. Just a minute.
Yes. I'm so sorry. I think it's my signal.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So thank you, Anirudh, for inviting me for this presentation. This is Manish Dabkara from EnKing International, which is our brand name, while our company name is EKI. Its full form is EnKing International, EKI Energy Services Limited. And if you find us on India's stock exchange, you should type EKI Energy Services Limited or simply EKI, then you would be able to find about our more information about our organization, our stock performance, our financial performance, and everything. Yeah, so we are the only listed company in the world that means in our domain related to the climate change or carbon credit. So we are the only company in the world which has got listed. We are one of the world's largest carbon offset developer or carbon credit developer, having 2,000 plus clients at 90 plus nations, having more than 100 plus vendors. We do have our clients and our team based at 40 plus nations and almost 12 plus years. Recently on 10th August, we have completed 13 years. EKI is 13 years. And as you know, the carbon industry had got started during year 2005. So almost our industry vintage and our vintage is approximately very nearby. So industry is around 15, 16 years old and we are around 12, 13 years old organization. In India, we do have market share of around 90% and internationally into the renewable energy voluntary markets, we do have market share of around 30%. These are some of our clients at the national and international level. At international level, we are working very closely with the World Bank, with IMF, with IBERT, StarTech, Pacific Light Singapore, and in the domestic one, we are working with almost all major independent power producers or big projects whatsoever are there, which are generating carbon credits in India. Our services is basically divided into 4-5 segments. One is related to we help organizations, we help projects for the GHG projects registration, greenhouse gas, GHG projects registration. Then we also help them to get it verified and then finally bring the revenue by trading those credits. So there are different carbon credit mechanisms like CDM. If you see the first line, the second line of the screen, CDM is Clean Development Mechanism, Verified Carbon Standard, Gold Standard Certified Emission Reductions, Gold Standard Verified Emission Reductions, International Renewable Energy Certificates, Gold Standard labeled International Renewable Energy Certificates, and similar various kind of environmental commodities are there. And in all major environmental commodities which are voluntary in nature, as of now we are working. Since you know there are two types of different markets are there, one is compliance one and another one is a voluntary one. So we majorly work under the voluntary markets for last 8 years, and internationally voluntary markets are more dominating as compared to the compliance one, because the compliance one is basically earlier it was being generated through Kyoto protocol, and then during 2011-12 it had because of the withdrawal of Japan, Russia, Australia, New Zealand, the Kyoto Protocol commitment period 2 starting from 1 January 13 to 2020, December 2020. That particular period was not very much productive in reference to the carbon markets. So the voluntary markets had taken over, and we are majorly working under all different carbon credit mechanisms, or you can say carbon credit standards, or the carbon offsets of very wide variety. We are working under the voluntary carbon markets. And now slowly after this COP26, I will do cover the same knowledge in my next slides related to the Conference of Parties meeting number 26, which is going to held from 30th October to mid of November, approximately first 2 weeks. It is going to happen, and there the new international compliance program may get evolved. So let's see how it goes, or it may take more time. So it depends. Now, the second services we do provide is related to determination of carbon footprint of any organization or company or project. And then the third one, we also help organization for their sustainability reporting related to CDP reporting, science-based target, net zero, and various other national and international standards of leaders whatsoever are there. We are working under the same. We also help organizations to implement ISO standards, basically ISO 14064, which is related to carbon footprinting, 50001 is related to energy management system, and similar other various standards. And lastly, we work for majorly oil and gas installations in India for getting their outlets electrically safe. So we do electrical safety audits. And now the two words that you might in our sustainability domain might have heard about the climate change, the global warming. So what is global warming and why? Because of this global warming, climate change is happening. So the concept is very clear. You may be knowing the greenhouse gas effect. So to live on Earth, greenhouse gas effect is very much necessary. And so there are 7 identified greenhouse gases which are very important for our globe. One is CO2, carbon dioxide, then methane, HFC, PFC, SF6. So these are all the gases, and these gases, they do have their global warming potential. So they do absorb heat during daytime, and they do emit the heat during nighttime. So at the nighttime, during daytime sun is there, during nighttime sun is not there. So these greenhouse gases, they do trap heat during daytime, and then they emit the same at the nighttime. And so our average global temperature remains comfortable to live for animals, for forests, for trees, for human beings. So that is very much important phenomena which is required to live over the earth. But because these greenhouse gases like CO2 or methane, due to high industrialization, their concentration in the atmosphere had got increased a lot. And so the more heat these gases are retaining within the earth, and at the night time they are emitting more, the additional one. And because of the same phenomena, greenhouse gas effect, because of the greenhouse gases, climate change or the global warming, the issue is being is now very critical in nature these days. So the picture shows very clearly that the Earth's temperature is increasing, and that is why it is called as a global warming. And because of the global warming, climate change is happening, and because of this climate change, natural calamity frequency and the diseases over Earth is increasing day by day. So these are all the 7 different gases that I have told you. Now, one is CO2, then methane, nitrous oxide, perfluoride, HFC, PFC, sulfur hexafluoride, and nitrogen trifluoride. So these are all these 7 gases. And if like under the Kyoto Protocol, it had been mentioned, like all developed nations, they are the obligated entities to reduce their emissions. And if they are not able to do, then they can buy carbon credits. And 1 carbon credit is 1 ton CO2 equivalent emission reduction from the atmosphere. And why E has been mentioned here after CO2, E equivalent? Because the global warming potential of carbon dioxide is considered as 1. So all gases, so if you are doing any project activity which is helping you to reduce nitrous trifluoride, so you need to measure the number of carbon offsets based on the tons of CO2 only. So that these are the carbon credits. And then the Kyoto Protocol had been introduced during year 1997. It had been enforced during 2005. And as I had already quoted or informed you, like all developed nations had been considered as the obligated entities to reduce their emissions. And if they are not able to do, then they are allowed to buy carbon offsets under the Kyoto Protocol. Commitment period 1 was from 2008 to 12. Commitment period 2 was from 13 to 20. But from 13 to 20, it was because of the withdrawal of the 4 major nations and not having US in the treaty. So the European Union was the only entity, you can say, which had adopted, or which had you can say complied with the targets that had been given under the Kyoto Protocol. Under the Kyoto Protocol, all developed nations had been considered as the obligated entity to reduce the emissions, but that was not very much enough. It had been considered like the developing nations, say China, which is the world's largest, but number 1 emitter is there. Then India is there at position number 5 or 6. So because the 2-3 developing nations are coming under top 10 top emitters, so it had been highly negotiated that developing nations should also reduce their emission, and so new agreement had been introduced called as the Paris Agreement. And the Paris Agreement had been introduced during December 2015. It had got enforced from November 16, and from 1 January 2021. So now we are living in the Paris Agreement era. And what is the target that had been given under the Paris Agreement is, if you see during the pre-industrialized average temperature was 0 degrees centigrade, and during 1920 1 degree centigrade had already been that means the global temperature, the normal temperature had got already increased by 1 degree centigrade, and it had been anticipated if everything goes whatever the situation that we do have now, then 3.3 degrees centigrade is the temperature which is going to get raised now by the end of the century. And whatsoever the voluntary pledges called as nationally determined contributions, those had been submitted under the Paris Agreement by all the nations, and if all nations will do comply with the same, then still we would be able to reduce only 0.3 degrees centigrade. Whatsoever the temperature that will from 3.3 degrees centigrade to 3 degrees centigrade we would be able to achieve. But so the Paris Agreement target is we need to cap 1.5 degrees centigrade capping by year 2050, and by the end of the century we should become carbon neutral. And by any mean, 2 degrees centigrade should not be the temperature with that we should that should get raised during this century. So that is a target, you see. Yeah, so Article 6, like around 28 articles are there under the Paris Agreement, and all that articles approximately had got negotiated. Only Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, which mentions about the carbon credit industry, had not been negotiated till date during last 3-4 years. And so COP26 Conference of Parties meeting number 26, which is going to get conducted on during the end of October and mid of that means it happens for the 2 weeks. So it will do start from 31st October and will get ended over the next 2 weeks. And the major things that is going to get negotiated at this conference is the negotiation of Article 6, which is, and the important one is 6.2, Article 6.2, which mentions about the cooperative approaches between the two nations to reduce the emission and switch or transfer the carbon credits, and international mechanism under Article 6.4, maybe called as Sustainable Development Mechanism, is going to get negotiated. In India, the NDC that we have declared is the major targets that we are going to achieve is through increase of renewable energy projects by 40% of our total electricity generation capacity, reduce emission intensity of the economy by 33 to 35% by 2030, and to create additional carbon sinks of 2.5 to 3 billion tons of CO2 equivalent through additional forest and tree cover. As you know, in India, during the Kyoto Protocol, and till now also, our nodal agency is Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, and there during Kyoto Protocol, there was a department called as National CDM Authority of India, which had regulated which kind of project should get registration, so we need to take a host country approval letter for getting our project registered under the CDM. So NCDM had got established, and now since we are living in the Paris Agreement era, so on 27 November 2020, a new committee had been formed by MOFCC called as AIPA, Apex Committee for the Implementation of the Paris Agreement. And if you see the last para, which mentions one of the key function of AIPA would be to operate as a national authority to regulate carbon markets in India, either in the form of emission trading scheme or either in the form of carbon tax. So still in India, this concept is will require 1 to 2 year time to get fully evolved, or more than the same. So under Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, formulate guidelines for the constitution of the projects or activities under Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, issue guidelines on carbon pricing, and similar stuffs would be the major work area of AIPA will be there under the Paris Agreement era. So COP26, yeah, I have already covered that COP26 is very critical because this Article 6 of the Paris Agreement is going to get negotiated under the same. So this is the last slide of mine, and after this, the small, if you see my screen, then I mentioned about the stakeholders whosoever are there in our industry. So I will do cover this first, and then we'll do cover the last slide. So equipment manufacturers or EPC contractors are there, which comes under the climate change industry or carbon industry. Seller of carbon credit or project owner. So if you see at the right hand side of the screen, EK has been mentioned. So we are working in all these domains. So we are the seller of the credits or project proponent or project owner. We are project developer or advisory organization. Then third party inspection company. So for example, if you so this slide is majorly to show you who are the stakeholders, and if you want to do your own business or if you want to do job, you can identify the similar companies and what role you want to play under the carbon industry, and then help our earth to reduce emissions, help our climate to reduce emissions, and contribute to the overall well-being of human beings and other species or earth. So at the fourth point here, it can be mentioned third-party inspection companies are there, then national CDM authority, designated national authorities are there under which you can do your job. Then standard or regulatory bodies are there, which is again one kind of stakeholder for us. Then traders, seller and aggregators, buyer and aggregator, buyer of credit. So these are the ultimate. This is the ultimate entity or destination of the carbon credit, which where the carbon credit life is going to get ended when any end buyer used to buy the credit, because there is a primary market is there to sell the credits, there is a secondary market which is there to sell the credits, and that is how our carbon market works, global carbon market works. Then NGOs are there who helps for the rural area project identification or implementation. Then registry operators are there, exchanges are there, or you can say the marketplaces are there. Exchanges are not very much successful till date, so the marketplaces are there. Then investors are there, news media magazine portals are there, and multilateral organizations are there. And this is the last slide of mine, which mentions everything about the climate change industry, or how all nations are going to meet the Paris Agreement targets. So if you see at the last year, global targets are there in the Paris Agreement, and here it mentions we need to limit 1.5 degree centigrade and should not go more than 2 degrees centigrade. So this is the limiting global temperature. Then annually we need to reduce 52 to 58 gigaton of CO2 reduction, so to meet this carbon neutrality or net zero emissions at each nation level. And then the international carbon market is going to help ambition of the economies or the countries if they are not able to do much within their own nation. So they can buy carbon credits from the nations where it's cheap, and this carbon credit revenue will help those nations or organizations or projects or industries to adopt more and more clean and green technologies. At the country level, what, for example, India need to do, we will do form regulations like cap and trade mechanism or penalties. In the form of penalties, we will do create more policies, maybe market-based, non-market-based. Then domestic carbon market is also one of the things which has been discussed a lot during last 2-3 years within India. And ITMOs, internationally traded mitigation outcomes under the cooperative approaches, is the next, the last thing that is going to happen at the country level. At the organization level, what organizations need to do, they need to determine their GHG accounting, they need to do their GHG accounting, they need to determine their carbon footprint, implement mitigation process projects, and use, for example, if the compliance market do tell you to reduce only 10% emissions, but you do still have 90% of your emissions, so just buy the international voluntary carbon credit from the international voluntary market. So that is the last option any manufacturing organization or service organization can offer. And So corporate focus should be there over the G inventory, GHG projects, and carbon neutrality. Then Article 6.2 and 6.4 are the options which are which will help us to reduce our emissions by buying carbon offsets. Voluntary markets are during last 15 years it was voluntary markets were there, but during last say 3-4 years or 5 years they are playing their role tremendously in the international climate change ambitions which various global organizations had taken, and non-market approaches. And then at the last, the aviation industry had been told that you should reduce your emission under COSIA, and maritime industry they are going to take their own time to cap emissions because the as you know, the maritime, they are the cheapest source of transportation on Earth to transfer material or stuffs from one place to another place. So, but they are also one of the major polluter within our climate space. So these are the two industries which are going to put their own efforts to reduce the emissions. So overall, you see at the global, what is the global target here under the Paris Agreement, how the countries are going to perform, how the organizations are going to perform, how the voluntary market is going to help, how this aviation and maritime industry is going to play their own role. So the overall Paris Agreement implication to the corporate, state level and center level is going to get implemented very soon. So in developing nations like us, it may take more that I do anticipate at my personal capacity, it may take around 2 to 3 years to get settled down about the carbon markets, while in developed nations like European Union or maybe Australia, New Zealand, US, it will take less time because they are more organized. They do have their verified data, and they can take their actions very frequently, or that means at the high pace as compared to the developing nations like us, because under the Kyoto Protocol, they were the obligated entities, and for the last 15 years, they are doing something or the other to reduce their emissions under the through the emission trading scheme or carbon credit mechanisms. That means the carbon tax mechanism. So various different options had been adopted by various other nations to achieve the targets. So yeah, this is the final slide of mine. These are the contact details. At the last, you see the company name and the address and our identification number, corporate identification number. So yes, Anirudh, I'm done.
Great. That was amazing. Thank you, Mr. Dabkara. I don't know how you've been at it for the last 12 years and saw the trend when literally nobody else really saw it. 2008, 2009 is when you started this journey. And the rest of us only starting to really understand and look at carbon markets now or in the last 2-3 years. So you read the leaves, and I think EKI/EnKing is definitely a true champion in this space and getting well rewarded. I do have some questions for you, but before I dive into that, I want to launch one more quick poll just to get a sense from our audience of where they're at with their knowledge of carbon markets now. So 3 questions with respect to our climate. How do you feel right now? Are you optimistic and ready to go, or pessimistic? What do you think is the primary role of carbon markets? Is it to avoid further emissions or to remove existing emissions, or both? And what do you personally want from carbon markets? To create impact? Do you want returns and revenue as an investor or as a sustainability entrepreneur? Or do you just want to learn? Oh, wow, these are pouring in. Another 10-15 seconds, and we'll have a look at the results, and then I'll share my questions as well. Great. We're going to end this right now. Okay, you can all see them on your screen. I think, yeah. You can see the results, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So I think I love that everyone's mostly optimistic over here and ready to go. Great that people perceive the role of carbon markets to do both avoidance and removal. Hopefully more tilting toward removal in the future. And it's a good mix of people who are looking for returns and revenue from the carbon markets, as well as to create impact. Great. So with that in mind, let's dive right in. Mr. Dabkara, so clearly there's an environmental, socio-economic framework for impact assessment with any of the work that we are all doing in the climate and sustainability space. In your opinion, the environmental impact for carbon markets being, avoidance and removal of emissions, how else do you measure environmental impact? Do you have a certain framework to say, okay, this particular industry needs to be decarbonized and carbon markets are going to be most like primed and ready to go after, let's say, aluminum, steel industries, agriculture, right? Do you have a certain target set that you're going after as well based on your own frameworks and analysis, or is it just wherever demand comes from?
So the question that I have understood is related to the what sort of industries are generating more carbon offsets, or the other.
So there's a big electricity and heat production leads to about 25% of global carbon emissions. Agriculture leads to about 24%. Transportation 14%. There's a good mix of variety of use cases that are actually leading to carbon contribution to our planet, into the atmosphere and the oceans. Carbon credits are obviously one really powerful tool in our toolbox, right? How do you choose which industry is most relevant to go after and address with carbon credits? Is it just based on demand, whatever is available, wherever the demand comes from, or is it a specific active framework that you have to say, okay, carbon credits for decarbonizing industry, carbon credits to decarbonize transportation?
So as of now, if you refer the number of projects which are all registered across the world are like 80 to 90% projects they came from the renewable energy projects. So that means in majority of the same is related to the electricity and heat production, maybe because renewable energy is also very helpful to produce heat, maybe using the biomass to generate steam or solar water heaters and stuff. So most of the projects in the industry came from electricity sector majorly, and then the second one is the industry sector. Transportation sector, building, other energy and agriculture, they are the least contributor to the carbon offsets industry till date. But now, because of the nature-based solution projects, the number of carbon offsets which are being required or which are there in high demand is coming from agriculture, forest and other land use. That means nature-based solution projects. So now the new industry which is upcoming is related to the agriculture. Then in transportation, it's electric vehicles. In buildings, it's green building. So after predominant, you can say the number of projects which came from electricity sector or industry sector, now during last 1 year, there is a high traction within the transportation, building, agriculture and other energy sectors. So this is the present state.
Got it. And if somebody is looking to unlock carbon credit revenue from their particular use case, let's say electric mobility, right? How would they approach doing that?
So there are different methodologies that have been approved by United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and we need to check what is the activity that we are doing and how that activity is getting accommodated under that methodologies. And if it's already approved, then we can get the project registered as soon as possible. Otherwise, we need to take approval from United Nations or the regulatory, whatever the regulatory or carbon credit standard is there, to get the approval of the technology that can be registered. So it depends, like there are various different say around 250 to 300 various methodologies are there, and each methodology they do have more, say more than 5 different applicability criteria or eligibility criteria for the various technologies. So now, based on each case, we need to identify and then can proceed ahead.
Got it. How many use cases would you say exist today that can unlock carbon credit revenue on the supply side? Biogas, clean cooking, waste heat recovery, waste to energy, electric mobility, like you said. These are obvious ones. Nature-based solutions, mangroves, afforestation.
Yes.
What else, right? Like how many use cases would there be?
What else can be the new technologies which are quite upcoming?
Because there are several solutions that help avoid emissions as well, right?
Yeah.
And obviously the ones that remove emissions are slightly earlier in the technology stack, with the exception of these solutions, right? Biochar, bioenergy, direct air capture, etc. So there are a lot of people sitting in India who are looking to unlock carbon credit revenue, right? And get into these markets. What would it take?
So it depends over what is the cost or what is the investment that you need to do to generate those carbon credits. So for example, in case of electricity generation, so say example solar power project, so 1 megawatt project used to cost around 3 to 4 crore rupees, and for 1 megawatt, say 20% plant load factor, you would be getting around 2000 number of carbon credits. So you can determine what is the landing price of those carbon credits if you only want to depend over the carbon credit revenue. So and for example, in case of forest, if you it comes around $1.5 to $2 per hectare would be the approximately investment for, say, the sustainable agricultural practices adaptation. So it depends on what is the revenue model. For example, if you have some other primary revenue modules like generation of electrical energy from solar power project or wind power project, then that will give you a major revenue for the same, and then carbon credit will be the booster in the return of investment. But for example, if you only depend over the generation of revenue from the sale of carbon credit, so you need to choose your interest area, then investment required, the number of offsets that technology would be generating on a monthly or yearly basis, and what would be the return on investment for you. So various different investment options are there at the technology level, at the credit level, and carbon credit level. So need to determine on case-to-case basis.
Got it. It's like Tesla for the longest time used to create more revenue to their top line from carbon credits.
Yes.
Revenue from cars sold, right? To get the technology to be widely adopted till it became a commercially viable in itself.
Yes. So in India also, if you see during 2000, say 5 to 8, 9 approximately, so there were 2-3 companies like Gujarat Fluoro Limited or SRF. They were into the refrigeration gases destruction and the sale of carbon credits, whatever they were destroying those greenhouse gases. So the revenue that they were generating from sale of carbon credit were much higher as compared to their general revenues from the industrial production.
Got it. So this leads me into the next set of metrics for impact, social impact. There's a big debate going on right now, and it has been for a while, that the global north, the so-called global north, which is responsible for historical emissions, most historical emissions, can't sit and preach to the global south, the developing nations, that they must decarbonize and not grow, right?
Yeah.
So how do you balance out the social impact that our market is going to arrive at? Like, how is this balance between north and south and west east going to really play out? And what do you think the social impact of the carbon markets is going to be on our planet? So not from an economic lens, not from an environmental lens, but like number of jobs created, where are they going to be created, and what are the co-benefits associated with carbon credit projects?
So these days, you see, the carbon credits are getting very much associated with the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, and all the social impact whatsoever can be there. Those 17 SDG goals is taking care of the same. So any project which is supporting more and more SDG parameters, that means creating more and more social impact, then those projects the international carbon market rate used to be high as compared to the projects which are creating less or very minimal social impact. So social impact is very much highly considered by the carbon credit industry. And yeah, so for example, so there is a forestry project, and if you with a forest project, if you are um, doing some activity related to the livelihood generation, or some similar activities where the jobs and like social upliftment is there, economical upliftment is there. So all those kind of projects or credits are there in high demand these days across the world.
Got it. And this brings me to my last question, economic impact. I think conscious capitalism and wealth creation while doing good is literally the holy grail, right? And this is something that I think a lot of us as climate sustainability entrepreneurs are still trying to wrap our head around and understand how we approach doing this. Like, because this is magical, right? In 6 months to create 10x wealth for society, while creating environmental and social impact. What's the secret sauce that you have kind of nailed over here?
So, like as during the initial presentation slides, I have mentioned, we are the only company in the world which is being listed at the stock exchange, and we are listed there at Bombay Stock Exchange. So, maybe you see various organizations are now talking about ESG in each and every space that they can think for, either at the project level, at the company level. Then after at the emission reduction, net zero emissions, carbon neutrality. So maybe for various investors, I think this is stock, maybe the good choice for the same. And so the demand is high, supply is limited. And that's why apart from generating carbon credit revenue for our clients and creating more and more sustainability at the organization level, at the project level, or at the society level, you rightly told, like it was high value generation for our shareholders also. So that it had went very well.
Yeah, not just asking that from a perspective of the share price, because I think that's a reflection of work done in society. But wealth creation directly tying into a solution that's having an environmental social impact, that's the only way for it to scale, right? Because that means there's a pull-based demand from the market. And that's genuinely how solutions can get scaled. So I think there's a lot for us to learn from EKI's experience over there, and just take it as a really good model. My last question, I'm going to go into audience questions. Is there a rising price of carbon in your opinion because there's exceedingly high demand as a result of companies facing, compliance needs? Or do you feel that scalability of supply is also going to start happening, where far more sustainability entrepreneurs and their projects will be able to tap into these markets? And, there'll be a demand supply kind of, both will be growing.
Yeah, so the supply, the supply these days is quite limited, and the demand is tremendously high. And so the carbon market rates are also getting increased, had also got increased during last 4 to 5 months, and not. And before, the demand is very high, and the demand was low, and the supply was very high during last 8 years, starting from 2013 to 2020. So now the scenario is changing, and more and more number of carbon offsets are required to come in the market. But again, there is a high conflict related to the Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, related to the corresponding adjustment or double counting, because all the developing nations are also now, they have their own target. So the COP26 is going to become very critical, and negotiation of Article 6 is very much important to get pure clarity about, or full clarity about what kind of carbon offsets can be generated in the Paris Agreement era, what are so those may be called as mitigation outcomes, what are all allowed to be traded in the international carbon market, so that may be called as internationally traded or tradable mitigation outcome. So people need to wait for more 2-3 months to get full clarity. Although since we are there into this industry for last 13 years, and we are definitely, we are very much optimistic that the good decisions and simple, less complex decisions will do come, so that carbon industry will remain very good alternative option for people to meet their climate emissions.
Got it. Thank you. We'll go into some audience questions too. And since there's a lot, I'm just going to read them out and ask you directly instead of calling out the person who's asked it. So Ruchir asks, you mentioned carbon exchanges haven't worked. Why have carbon exchanges not worked versus marketplaces?
So the problem is in the voluntary carbon market, for each project, the carbon credits are unique. So it depends over the vintage of the carbon credit, the technology, country of origin, sustainable development goals that the project is supporting, whatever the investment that had been done within the project. So there are various variables which is not, and so the or the exchange for the similar kind of or the similar feature of carbon credit, there should be ample supply, should be there, ample buyer should be there, ample suppliers should be there. So the exchange would be able to then determine based on the buy supply metrics and the quantity and rate metrics, they would be able to bring some good rates for the carbon credits to get traded. So and that's why the marketplaces are there and exchanges are not in the voluntary carbon market especially, and during last 15 years it was not possible to establish any good exchange, or whatever the exchanges are there as of now or in the in our carbon industry. So they mention them as the exchanges, but I think they should be categorized more as the marketplaces as compared to the exchanges. So that is a reason for the voluntary carbon market space. The exchanges are not there, while various n number of marketplaces are there.
Got it. Mayank asks a really long question, but I'm going to try and reframe it into a short one. EnKing has 90% of the market share. Does this basically mean that you're the only active player? What does that mean in the context of a developing carbon market ecosystem that India is in? Who verifies these credits? Yeah, if you could just answer that in a snapshot.
So the last question, who verifies this credit? Like the verification used to happen at two different levels. One, whatever the documentation the consultant like us to prepare, it need to get audited, validated, verified from a third-party inspection company called as designated operational entities. So these DOEs are regulated and approved by the carbon credit standards, and majorly if you are approved, you are an approved DOE from United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change under Kyoto Protocol. So in almost all carbon credit standard, you would be able to get your project audited from the same third-party inspection company. So yeah, this is the one answer, one answer to the question that had been asked, and the other one, I do not remember exactly.
We'll come back to that. We can come back to that.
Okay.
So Vedant, who's a solar entrepreneur out of Maharashtra, he's asking, you mentioned that there are still 2-3 years for carbon markets to take off in India. What can we do to reduce this lead time? And how can existing clean tech, climate tech players in India collaborate with international players to reap the benefit? So
international carbon market is there. National carbon market we don't have. So yeah, international, as what I think, depends. Like the government will do decide, then the carbon market may come within 2 to 3 months also. So but what do I anticipate? It may take 2 to 3 years for the developing nation like us. And meanwhile, for last say 8 years, the voluntary carbon market space is quite established, and we can obviously sell the credits in the same market. So there's no any problem while the lead time is here within India.
Got it. So Arjun of Smart Joules asks, and as Mafia co-director, does it make sense for energy efficiency projects to apply for carbon credits? What's the price per ton of carbon after all transaction costs that can be earned? And what's the minimum scale a project should be at before going to these markets?
Yeah, so each starting from the type of expenses that we need to do for any carbon credit project cycle. One is you need to pay to the consultant like us, you need to pay a third-party inspection company, you need to pay a fee for registration on per carbon credit basis, and fee for verification on per carbon credit basis on annual basis. So these are all the expenses that we need to add. And then the international carbon market price these days, say for example $1, and the expenses that you are doing is around say 25 cents. So 75 cents dollar would be the net profit for you. And so these are all the transaction costs, around 20-25 cents I have mentioned. And the minimum scale of the project then again depends on the expenses. I think the project which is having capacity more than 10,000, the 10,000 credits, if any project is generating, or in case of say solar power project, wind power project, if it's more than 5 megawatt, then the project used to be feasible. But for example, if you do have less capacity, say 1 megawatt or 500 kilowatt or less than capacity, we can create a bundled activity, bundled project, and then we can apply for the registration. So it makes then life easy for the project owner, or each project, small project owners, to not to pay more and earn less.
Got it. Koshi is asking about the oil and gas industry and says it's emitting a lot of carbon. Can you share more on how we can stop this? So perhaps this is more from the target industry to decarbonize. How can carbon markets be used?
So obviously, till date, oil and gas is going to get burned. Carbon dioxide is will get emitted in the atmosphere. So we industry, or especially the industry, need the replacement or alternative fuels like green hydrogen, or maybe more and more renewable energy projects. So these are the alternatives for the oil and gas industry. Otherwise, these days, what is happening till the alternatives are not getting fully commercialized, or they are not working at the full capacity what this oil and gas the projects are working. So the new trend is buy carbon neutral oil, buy carbon neutral gas. So superimpose your carbon offsets over the tons of oil you are using, and then this is how the recent trend is here to use carbon neutral fossil fuel. So,
yeah, there's a company called Prometheus Fuels out of the US. I don't know if you've heard of it. Carbon neutral fuels. In fact, I don't know, one of their execs may be on this call too, because he's based out of India.
okay.
So they're big part. They're trying to address the need for sustainable aviation fuel by creating carbon neutral fuels. And I think that's now. So Ocean MBA, I don't know who that is, asks, how can a company generate its own carbon credits? I know that we need to be generating our own credits by getting certified, but can we just do it ourselves? Once sold, how can I track these? How can I track that emissions are being reduced? She or he works for a fuel cell company. And also, which certification body do you recommend? VCS, Gold Standard, or CDM?
So VCS, Gold Standard, CDM are the carbon credit standards under which you need to apply for for getting your project registered. And if you have sufficient expertise in house to prepare a project design document, monitoring report, then you can do it in house also. You need to get it. So it's mandatory to get your project registration, your project verification, if you want to buy your carbon offsets in the international carbon market. Otherwise, as per scope 1, 2, 3 emissions to determine the carbon footprint, and if you do have all such kind of activities which helps to reduce your emissions, then you can consider the same to determine your scope 1, 2, 3 emissions accordingly. So yeah.
Got it. All right, one second. I'm getting lost in the questions, so many. Pranav asks, how are carbon credits assessed environmentally? Okay, we answered this question. For a carbon sink to reach its complete potential like a tree or a forest, how long does it take? And how is buying carbon credits to offset emissions based on future potential carbon sinks?
As of now, future potential carbon sink, they are not, as of my knowledge, those are not tradable, because it may happen that in the future those offsets may not be generated. So I think as per our trading experience, we are not very much working over the future offsets which may be upcoming. So it's quite tough, although we may call them as a forward trading. But for example, if you do not generate, then you need to pay the penalty as per the emission reduction purchase agreements that you will do sign with the buyer of those carbon credits. And about the carbon sink or nature-based solution project, so it depends on the species that you are using, the type of plant or tree that you are trying to grow. So it depends on, like, so there are three categories. One is the high growing species like bamboo, then medium growing like timber, and then very slow growing. So it depends on type of species that you are going to offer.
Yeah, blue carbon is heavily in demand right now, right? Mangrove based.
Yes. Yeah.
So heavily in demand.
Yes.
Okay, Vidyut says, I'm going to try and speed up so we can fit everyone's in and get over on time. As a startup, we are working on carbon removal. Vidyut, you're one of the rare ones in the country working on carbon removal. We've seen some interest from large corporations by setting up carbon removal goals. How should a startup like this go about verification process that is acceptable worldwide and is also cost effective? Let's come back to this one. I think it's been answered in several ways, but we'll come back to this one. Will you also email me? Okay, Akhilesh asks, once a commitment is made at the international level by countries, after which policy is passed on domestic level, is there a window within which domestic policy must be passed in a timely manner to keep up with the committed timelines? Or is it just you can craft it whenever you want as a nation?
So as per the international like Paris Agreement or Kyoto Protocol, they do not tell you like by within what period you should start taking climate action by implementing more policies and the like implementation of ETS or carbon tax. So obviously, any nation would like to implement all those policies or procedures or ETS or tax as soon as possible. So there is no any timeline given on to each nation under the Paris Agreement.
Got it.
But although we need to submit under the Paris Agreement, there is a meeting, there is a requirement called as or the kind of meeting that used to happen is called as a stocktake meeting. So every 5 years under the Paris Agreement, the nation would be requiring to submit the actions that they have taken and the emissions that they have reduced, and under the stocktake meeting it would be again assessed like whatever the nationally determined contributions are there across the world, either those contributions are helping to cap 1.5 degrees centigrade global temperature rise or not. Otherwise, more climate emission or more nationally determined, more ambitious NDCs need to be adopted. So it is a kind of an international peer pressure that nations are having to perform.
Alok of Superhuman Race asks, if a company or an individual is looking to buy carbon offsets, where do they go today? And what credible avenues to purchase are available?
So there are various carbon credit traders are there like us. You can discuss with anyone and check for the investment opportunities.
Okay. Kostab's asking a question about tapping into carbon assets, boost in revenues. Let me try and come back to this one. Tanya asked, how do you evaluate the credits availability? Do you think a software that analyzes sources and sinks can help in the process to evaluate credits availability?
No, it depends over the network only. There is no any,
Yeah.
although there are registries where you can see the number of offsets, the number of projects which are available, but without confirming from the project owner, it would be highly difficult. So the networking is the only option which give you more market insight about the availability rates and everything.
This is kind of happening to an extent with geoanalytics for forestry, at least, right? Where evaluation of potential carbon sinks can be done using satellite imagery.
Yeah.
That's one use case. Maybe there are a few more, agri-tech with IoT sensors. But yeah, if there were a software that analyzes sources and sinks, that would be quite a game changer for everybody.
Yes.
Then you know exactly where to find supply.
Yeah.
Okay, Webhub asks, and we'll wrap up in 2 minutes right after that. Why are there no RED Plus or AFO or nature-based projects in India? What's the current status of corresponding adjustment for India?
So corresponding adjustment is the issue, which is like in India's position. What I think is majorly related to, we do not want to get corresponding adjustments. Like we want to sell carbon offsets from India, and we also want to consider the same in our own emission reduction target. So that is called as either double counting or corresponding adjustment. So in India's position, what I do have knowledge about is the corresponding adjustment should not be there. That is a stand that we do have, that I have heard about from the like-minded developing Asian group during last UP25. And what was the other question, Anil?
About RED Plus.
Yeah, the number of projects from the forestry domain or nature-based solution projects are very, 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 or you can say negligible from India. But now it is getting more high momentum within India to develop more kind of afforestation, reforestation, REDD, RED plus, nature-based, this blue carbon projects or mangrove-based projects. So there is going to be very high momentum, not only in India related to the NB's projects, but across the world.
Got it. Last question from the audience. Deepa asks, Deepa Eco HQ, is EnKing/EKI developing an evaluation methodology in-house for carbon footprint consulting? And is there a possibility of getting that methodology licensed or certified by the government for your company? Should all, in addition to that, should all carbon footprint consultants in India get together and push the government to create an authorizing body, or just do it themselves?
So let me read the question again. If EnKing is
about carbon accounting,
evaluation methodology in house for carbon footprint consulting. So there are various standards are there, like the GHG protocol or ISO 14064. So all the guidelines and everything is there, which are available across the globe. So there is no need to determine or make any new methodology in house and get it patented. So or license. So there is no need. Because all the knowledge is already available, so there is no need for creating new such kind of methodologies in-house for us to determine carbon footprints. And in India,
you can skip that. So we'll to respect your time, we'll end right there. I want a closing thought on just the demand side and the supply side. So we have a lot of sustainability entrepreneurs on this call right now, right? Half of them are in Mafia, half not. If there are 2 or 3 use cases you would say, go after and build more projects in these areas, and we will help you unlock secondary, carbon credit revenue. What are those 2-3 use cases heavily in demand right now for avoidance and removal of emissions?
Nature-based solution projects related to agriculture, forestry, or mangroves. So this is a avenue everyone in the international community is looking for. And although you need land, and for example, in case of forest, you need land and you need a tree. So tree is not very much costly, but the land may be. So it depends on. So for example, if you can take like few of the state governments, they do have policy to give you land free of cost, maybe on lease or at the lowest cost, and then take those land and develop forest and earn carbon offsets from the same. So I think nature-based solution projects are the cheapest one in case as compared to the technology-based projects. So obviously go for the
And
same.
heavily in demand, like blue carbon right
Yes,
now is just
yes,
exploding in demand. Right?
yes, yes,
And on the
yes.
demand side, how, so, from our past conversation, I learned most demand is coming from international businesses. It's very, very little is coming from Indian businesses today.
Yes.
How is that going to be changing? How do we actually become more, agents of change and getting more organizations to want to buy carbon credit rather than having to do so for compliance reasons, right? And does this kind of tie in with BRSR next year or not at all?
So as you see, till date, the like 90, I think 98, 99% of the demand is coming from the developed nations and 1-2% from the developing nation. And this Paris Agreement may change the whole scenario, because once the Paris Agreement will get fully implemented in the developing nations like India or China, then each company would be getting their own target to reduce the emissions, and they would not be able to do, then they will do by offset. So once this Article 6 of the Paris Agreement will get negotiated, then government will take their positions either to implement carbon tax or ETS or other similar policy level mechanisms. Then stops will be more clear.
Got it. Amazing session, Mr. Dabkara. This has been great. I just want to leave us with an image of the level of impact created and yet to be created. We're at about 43 gigatons of emissions every year. I think of that, India is at about 3.5 gigatons of emissions every single year.
Mm-hmm.
It's still going out, right? That first needs to be avoided. Yes. Then what is already in the atmosphere and oceans needs to be removed, right? So we need to be doing about 40 gigatons of avoidance, 10 gigatons of removal every single year. Yes. And of that, I think EnKing/EKI has facilitated 150 million credits last year alone, right?
Yeah, so till date we have done for 100 million, and this year we are targeting 150. So maybe overall we may create impact of 250 million credit reduction from the
Amazing. And where does it go from there? Does it just keep scaling? Can there just be more and more and more credits generated? Is that going to be consistent? But the same projects will be generating the same.
Yeah, so project used to get registration, like there is a terminology called as creating period. So any technological based projects can get registration for maximum 21 years or may go up to 30 years based on the mechanism and technology, the carbon credit standard and technology. And for forestry based projects, it can go up to 90 years. So this revenue cycle, you can say, will vary from 30 to 90 years.
Got it. So as of today, EnKing is helping avoid 3% of India's carbon emissions.
Overall, you can say we are not working only in India. We do have our team located at more than 15 nations. So cumulatively, if you see, then yes, since we are registered or we are based in India, so cumulatively it's correct. But overall, like we do have very good strength or base there at Turkey, at Vietnam. So from there also we are generating many carbon offsets, and from various other nations like Kenya, we do have our team or projects, you can say, at Kenya, at Ghana, then at South Africa, then after Brazil, Mexico, Argentina, Canada. So we are majorly working in the developing nations to develop more and more projects, more credits, more so that developed nations can meet their more ambitions.
It is your tagline, the world's largest carbon credit developer and supplier, right?
Yes, yes.
Great. With that last thought, thank you so much again for being here, and to the rest of our guests for also joining us for SusTalks number 22. Thanks, Mr. Dabkara.
Thank you, Anirudh. Thank you all. Bye.